All right, kiddos, it is time to talk about the taiga. So we're moving, honestly, just a little bit down. If we were in the Arctic, if we're at the North Pole, we're just moving a little bit down. If we started walking from the North Pole south, eventually we would stop being in a treeless plain, and we would start to see a lot of these trees, known as coniferous trees, and we would know then that we are in the taiga. The taiga could be called the coniferous forest. It could be the boreal forest. Those are all the same thing. It is the largest terrestrial biome on Earth. It comes across giant portions of North America, Europe, Asia, and it's right at, like I said, if you're in the tundra and you walk south, you're going to find yourself there. So we need to look at the taiga. Now I'm looking in the background, I see lots of snow. It's obviously going to be a pretty cold place, but I start to see trees. And that's one of the big things that differentiates it from the tundra. And we can make some inferences from that. In the tundra, we know that, we have permafrost and the soil is pretty terrible and it's pretty inhospitable. Obviously here, the soil's got to be pretty decent. And there has to be an ample amount of water because trees take a lot of energy and a lot of water to grow. So if there are trees growing there, even though they're probably going to have adaptations to help them, we know that in the taiga, the soil is probably a little better than the tundra. Let's look at the climate. Okay, this probably doesn't surprise anybody. Long, cold winters. They have short, very mild, meaning not very hot, wet summers. In the winter, the winds from the Arctic blow down, and it makes it really, really cold in the taiga. The length of the day, much like the tundra, varies with the different seasons. Winter days are very, very short, and the summer days are even longer than normal because of the tilt of the earth. Fire is not uncommon in the taiga during the summertime, but I don't think they're as destructive and as massive as we would see in our savanna and prairies and the grasslands. But sometimes the fires are actually very useful. And this is how. There can be very old, sick trees that are they're aging out and they're very dangerous as their limbs and things start to fall. And fire seems to get rid of them, and it makes room for newer growth to happen within the boreal forest, the taiga. Pretty high amounts of rainfall in the taiga, 10 to 30 inches. Now that's not a massive amount of rain, and we'll see when we compare it to some others, but that's a decent amount of rain. And again, if you look down here, precipitation is relatively high, and it falls as snow during the winter and rain during the summer. Well, that's not much different than most places. If it's going to precipitate somewhere in the summer, it's probably going to be water. If it precipitates in the winter, in most places, it's probably going to be snow. Now, if we're talking in California, most of the time the precipitation, even in the winter, is going to be water and in the form of rain because it doesn't get that cold there. So it just depends on where you are. So there's the taiga climate. So we look back at the abiotic factors. The sun, well, it's not super intense. The water, there's a decent amount of water. The soil has to be very good. And we talked about the climate. There's two main seasons. So let's think about if we were a plant and we lived in the taiga. Well, we would have to have some very special adaptations to do that. Now, when we look at the taiga, you would think that it's got a lot of diversity. But it really doesn't have a lot of diversity in plants. Most of the kind of things that you're going to find in the taiga are trees that we call conifers. Conifers. I'm going to highlight that on here for you. Conifer trees. Now, what conifer trees are, they are the trees that have cones on them. So for us, we have pine trees. We have some conifer trees right behind Friendship. We have trees that have cones on them. They're also called evergreens. If you notice, pine trees, spruces and firs don't change color in the fall because they are forever green. Therefore, they are evergreens. Now, I know that the soil here is better than the tundra, But don't let that make you think that it is super fantastic soil. It is not like something you would be able to go and start planting crops in, because the soil is pretty thin, and it doesn't have a lot of rich nutrients that a lot of the plants would need, and it's still pretty rocky because we're not too far away from the tundra. And so it's something that we really, really need to think about. Even though the taiga has pretty high precipitation, the ground does freeze in the winters, and that makes it pretty tough for these trees to get the water that they need, because we know that trees need a lot of water. Because they don't have those big fat leaves like other trees do, and they have those thin needle-like leaves on them, they're able to keep in a little bit more water. Believe it or not, plants go through a process called transpiration. Transpiration. It's a lot like us where we sweat when we get hot, which is called perspiration. Plants go through something called transpiration. Now that's very important to understand, because they are able to keep in more water than most trees. There's another amazing adaptation that these evergreens have. The dark color that they have, the dark green that they have, helps them to absorb more heat. Imagine you were to go outside, especially this time of the year, and if you went outside in a white t-shirt versus a black t-shirt. If you were in a light colored t-shirt, it's going to take you a little more take you longer to get warm as compared to if you went outside in a black t-shirt, because the black t-shirt absorbs more of the sun's energy because of its dark color. The dark color of the evergreens helps them not only absorb more energy, but it keeps them warmer as well, which is pretty awesome. Now, if you notice, if you look at a pine tree, it has that angled shape. It's, and when we draw that, we're almost drawing like triangles as we move our way down the pine tree. It's shaped like that for a reason. That allows the limbs to kind of bend, and when they bend in, it makes the tree look super skinny. But when it does that, all of that snow that falls in the winter slides right on off of the evergreens and onto the ground, and it doesn't break the branches as quickly as it does other trees. A lot of times when we have ice and snow, we're not in school mainly because not the roads are dangerous, but a lot of trees have broken and their limbs have snapped off, and they have taken out power lines, and we can't come to school without power. And so one of the ways that evergreens kind of help themselves from doing that is they have very flexible limbs to begin with, and then they also are able to bend in that direction so that the snow and the ice kind of just like falls off of them very quickly. Kind of neat the way that they do that. The animals of the taiga. Well, this is not much different than the tundra. If you're going to live in the taiga, you better have a thick coat of fur because it is cold. Maybe like we talked about in class, when we get up on a cold morning and it's time to go to school, we just say, I would like to hibernate in bed all day. Many of these animals hibernate as well. Some migrate, and we've talked about migrate. That means to move. Hey, it's getting cold. I'm going to move to where it's a little warmer, and I'll come back when it gets a little warmer here. You have a lot of squirrels. You have a lot of birds that live in this area until they migrate. You might have little things like moles or an ermine. You can see some larger thing like deer and elk. Of course, the snowshoe hare is going to be here as well. There's a little bit more food and shelter for the snowshoe hare here. And then you get the big boys of predators. Okay, we're talking the big predators here. We're talking bears, like grizzly bears, wolves. You might find a Canadian lynx. You'll find wolverines, not the one from the comics, like the animal wolverines. And these are all pretty ferocious animals. You've got to be careful around all of these animals. So if I've got these big, giant, mean animals all around me, I've got to have some adaptations to get away from them. Well, we've already talked about the fact that deer have those super long legs and they are fast, which helps them in that very deep snow. But then your snowshoe hare turns white in the winter, and it turns to a little bit darker color in the summer so it can blend in better with its environment. Again, the ermine does the same thing. Dark brown in the summer. In the winter, it turns completely white. So it has camouflage. So we have talked about some animal adaptations in the taiga as well. So again, if we're kind of breaking the taiga down into some very, very quick bites of notes, it would look something very similar to this. The abiotic factors, the sun, soil, temperature, and the water of the taiga. The sunlight's not very intense due to the tilt of the earth. That gives like short days in the wintertime. And that's something to think about, because when we have those evergreens, those dark evergreens, they need to be able to soak up as much light as they can, and they're able to do that because of their darker color. The soil is not great, even though it supports trees. At least it supports trees. It's still rocky and acidic and not fantastic for other plants to grow there. The water, and that's in this ecosystem, there's about 10 to 30 inches of precipitation per year, which is obviously a lot more than the desert and the tundra. And the climate is harsh, cold winters and mild, wet summers. So we look at the non-living things, and we switch over to the living, or the biotic factors, and we know there are wolves and grizzly bears, there's squirrels, hares, ermines, and there's other things there as well. And for plant life, it's the evergreens that are most important. You know, grasses were most important, and the grasslands. Now we're talking about evergreens and the taiga. They have cones and needles. They don't lose their leaves every year in the fall. They stay green. If you're an animal and you live here, you pretty much need to either hibernate during the winter, or you better have a thick coat of fur and be able to eat a lot of fat and proteins to keep yourself warm and moving. And that's why you would see wolves and bears hunting and eating all the time. Of course, the bears take a big long nap. They hibernate a good portion of the time. So those are our notes about the taiga. Our job now is to take these notes, turn them into good sentences, and write a paragraph on abiotic factors and a paragraph on biotic factors inside of our Google Doc for the taiga. All right, so that is it for today, and make sure that you smash that like button and hit subscribe.